dependable. Can't join the dots, too over emotional. I know you said the life sounds better as a duet. I know you said go swimming with the clouds again. Go swimming with the clouds again. I go swimming with the clouds again. I go swimming with the clouds again. I go swimming with the clouds again.
Hi there, friends. I'm so honored that you would take time to hang out with me, open God's Word together, and connect with your BG4 family online. Thanks for being here as we open our new series on Proverbs called Growing Pains. I think you're going to enjoy what we have planned for you this summer as we open the book of Proverbs together. I hope you also enjoyed that video about camp. We just had such an amazing week with our middle school and high school students. And I want to remind you that when you give to BG4, there are lots of areas of ministry that benefit. One of them is our outstanding ministry to middle and high school students in Battleground, as well as keeping the lights on, keeping ministry going on all fronts here at Battleground Foursquare. So thank you for giving online, by text, in person. We just so appreciate you. Well, this morning, I get to talk about growing pains. And since I live in a house of teenagers, it seems really appropriate. We had one of those rites of passage this week, and that is my oldest starting her first job. I was thinking about rites of passage, getting your driver's license. Many of you went to graduation parties where students got diplomas in their graduations and then celebrated. There's a drink maybe when you turn 21. There's, of course, signing up for the draft when you turn 18. What are some of the rites of passage that happened in your world, in your family? Also, there are cultural rites of passage like a bar mitzvah or a quinceañera or a sweet 16 party. They're all ways that we kind of try to mark where kids turn from adolescence into adults. But I think if you've had the same experience that I have, you know that just because you throw someone a sweet 16 party, just because they turn 18 or because they're allowed to have a drink legally does not necessarily mean that they are functioning as adults. Some of us are not sure on some days that we are functioning as adults. And I think it's a pressing issue for many of us, how to pass on what it means to be a successful adult to the next generation. And also, even some of us feel like maybe we missed out on receiving those lessons when it was our turn to become adults, and we've been trying to catch up our whole life. This week, I asked people on social media, what is some advice that they would give their younger selves? I got a lot of response, but here are some highlights. Don't write your life story based on one chapter. Again, this is advice that people would want to give a younger version of themselves. Take a chill pill. Listen more, talk less. It's okay not to be busy 100% of the time. Don't let your spouse always be the fun parent. Amen to that. Put your savings in Apple. That's a good one that we can't go back in time and take advantage of. But I notice, because of the volume of response, that most of us have things that we have learned along the way that we would love to go back in time and pass on to our younger selves to maybe make the road a little bit smoother. That is not a modern phenomenon. In ancient Israel, the parents, the rulers, the people that spent time thinking about things gathered wise sayings of advice, much like what I was gathering on Facebook, and they put it in collections of wisdom literature. Proverbs is part of the wisdom literature in the Bible, and that would include about 5 books of the Bible, Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. They all have elements of wisdom literature in them. And that wisdom literature takes ideas about the best way to live your life and tries to put it in a way that's memorable, that people can even memorize, that they can pass on from generation to generation so they would know how to live a good life. Now, this kind of wisdom wasn't unique to Israel. There was actually wisdom literature in much of the Near East. Egypt had a big collection of wisdom literature. And Solomon was known for being someone that engaged in that broader culture, even with the countries around him, where he would read other ideas on what was the best way to live life. And then he began to compile and write his own. So a couple things we need to notice. Solomon is named as the author of Proverbs, but it's probably better to see him, and he is telling us that he's a compiler. He's a sponsor because he had money to give to this project. And he was also a contributor to this collection of wisdom that he brought together. Secondly, Bible wisdom does differ from wisdom from the nations around Israel because it is centered in the idea that God built the universe according to a certain order that could be called wisdom. And if we discover God's way of doing things and his principles and align ourselves to a God-centered world, we are going to live a much better life than if we fight it. Because the alternative is that we try to make the world revolve around us, that we try to make things always work our way, that we run over other people. And most of us have lived long enough to discover that way of doing things doesn't work out well in the end. Now, Proverbs is about generalizations, so sometimes you'll hear things and you'll think, maybe that's not always true. We're talking about general principles. It's like a compass direction. You point your life this way, and things are going to work out well because you are orienting your life around God and learning to live by his principles. It's learning to apply principles in a million different situations, not things that will all be detailed out, but rather principles that can be applied as you meet new and difficult and different situations. So, why should we care? Well, some of us are hungry to figure out how life can work better than how we've lived so far. Many of us are hungry to know what we can pass on and how we can pass on wisdom to the next generation. And some of you are actually part of what I would call the wisdom generation. Eric Erickson talked about different phases that adults go through, or actually children and adults go through, challenges that they face, and virtues that they can possess in different seasons of life. And 65 plus is this time of life when you can begin to evaluate what you've learned from life. And you can either go towards bitterness or you can go towards wisdom. And I just want to say to those of you who are in that senior bracket, some of us who are still right in the middle of raising kids, we are so hungry to learn from the wisdom that you've gained in your life. So Proverbs is also about how you pass on those lessons to others. Wisdom is a craft to practice, not a position to protect. Wisdom's a craft to practice, not a position to protect. It's not showing that you're smarter than everyone else. It's an art form. that you practice and you gain strength and mastery over as you do it over and over and learn in different situations in your life. So let's open to Proverbs chapter 1 and begin to unpack this craft of wisdom. These are the Proverbs of Solomon, David's son, king of Israel. Their purpose is to teach people wisdom and discipline, to help them understand the insights of the wise. Their purpose is to teach people to live disciplined and successful lives and to help them to do what is right, just, and fair. These proverbs will give insight to the simple, knowledge and discernment to the young. Let the wise listen to these proverbs and become even wiser. Let those with understanding receive guidance by exploring the meaning in these proverbs and parables. The words of the wise and their riddles. Fear of the Lord is the foundation of true knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and discipline. So, I'm going to unpack this statement that wisdom is a craft to practice. Proverbs just gave us its intentions. First was to learn wisdom, which is the right way to think about life. The Hebrew word for wisdom or to be wise or to have skill is hakmah. And it means a mastery of living according to God's expectations. It was considered a skill, an art, a craft. You could almost think of it like a trade. So there are some things that you can't just learn in a classroom. You have to learn by doing. Malcolm Gladwell is famous for saying that to master anything, whether it be an instrument or a sport or an art form, you need 10,000 hours of practice. And learning how to live according to God's expectations is no different. It's not something that we just learn through our head. We learn concepts and we can only begin to understand them by actually applying them to different situations that we encounter in life. Wisdom means to make the right choice at the right time. It means that you've learned something and you're able to actually apply it to a real life situation. It's the result of learning, but it's especially the result of practice. We learn how to live well. Proverbs works when you work. It's not even going to make sense if you just read it for head knowledge. It won't tell you how exactly to do your taxes or how to relate to your coworkers or how to manage every detail of a conflict that you face. It gives you the kind of mature thinking that can figure out the right thing to do in a situation that you've never seen before. It's not meant to be a promise that everything will go perfect, but a direction that works out well over time. It's also meant to train young people in maturity. We have a couple of young musicians in our house, and when you first learn to play an instrument, practice is pretty brutal, especially for your parents. But the band teacher at Chief is Mrs. Armstrong, and she gives them a calendar, and they have to record those brutal minutes of practice day after day after day in those first years of squeaky clarinets and high-pitched trumpets. You have to practice over and over again to master the basic skills of how to hold your mouth and how to press your fingers. And you have to think so much at the beginning just to make a little bit of music that doesn't sound very impressive. But then one day something happens when you practice. One day you don't have to think about it very much anymore. Your fingers know where to go. Your mouth takes the right shape and it's built the endurance and the muscles. And from that place comes the ability to improv a jazz solo or to follow along in a band and be able to have that experience of making music that's bigger than you are. And so this concept of practice, and those of you who've taught anything, maybe you've coached a team, you know that practice is not all that's important. Practicing correctly is important. Otherwise, you'll just learn the wrong thing. And the truth is that getting older doesn't necessarily make you wise. You have to actually practice wisdom to become wise, not just build up years. But practice gives you the ability to begin to default to making the right choices. And suddenly you don't even have to think about it and you're enjoying a beautiful life that comes from practicing making those right choices over and over again. Proverbs is also meant to explore, apply, and experience growth at any age. It has something to teach any of us. But again, it's something that we learn by doing. Proverbs only make sense when we take what we hear and go out and apply it to our lives. You remember learning how to drive? I sat behind a computer for hours on end to fulfill my driver's ed requirements. And then one day I got behind the wheel and I felt like I didn't know anything at all because my kinesthetic intelligence is really not that great. I was a scary kid to teach how to drive. But you can't learn until you get out there and test drive. And you will not get much from Proverbs unless you take some of the things we're learning, think about it through the week, and apply it to actual life situations. The second thing I want to talk about this morning is that wisdom grows through a posture of humility. A posture is more than an action. A posture is actually the attitude and the approach that you take to life. So sometimes we can do the right things with a really bad attitude. You might be doing the right things as a boss, but you could be haughty and arrogant and people won't be able to hear what you have to say. And the first thing that Proverbs 1 tells us is that to seek wisdom, we have to come with a posture of humility. We have to know that we have something to learn, not protect some kind of idea that we know everything. Again, wisdom is a craft to practice, not a position to protect. It starts with what Proverbs calls the fear of the Lord. These are important words to unpack because we have one idea about fear. It might have to do with Fright Night and Halloween, and that's not what this Hebrew word Yahweh means. This word, in this context, when it talks about the way that you look at God, means a sense of awe. It means respect for who he is and what his power is, and right-sizing yourself, knowing that God is the center around which everything comes from and revolves around, and I'm part of his creation. The world does not revolve around me. Understanding where I fit in God's world and God's story gives me a fear of the Lord. It gives me a God-oriented life. And Proverbs is one of the most important beginning concepts is that God built this world according to wisdom. And we don't get to tell God how to do things. We get to discover the way that God built things and begin to align our lives with his way rather than try to force him to do things our way. That's why wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. It also means to reject cynicism. It says fools despise knowledge and discipline. You know, it's really easy to be a backseat driver. I found as a young adult, it was so easy to criticize how my parents did everything. It was easy to criticize institutions like schools and churches and government. And there were lots to criticize. But you know what got really real? When I had my own kids, and I didn't have to just criticize the way other people did it, but I actually had to choose a path and say, well, how am I going to pass on how to live life to my kids? And I found that I absolutely needed an imperfect community called the church to help me pass on faith to my kids. I found that, despite the mistakes and things that happen at school, I'm going to lean on a community of teachers and mentors who are going to speak into their lives. And part of gaining wisdom is to reject the cynicism that just wants to criticize everyone else and to actually engage in a path of learning how to live a good life and to pass that on to others. I want to read a second passage from Proverbs chapter 1 before we close today with a couple other concepts that I think are important. My child, listen when your father corrects you. Don't neglect your mother's instruction. What you learn from them will crown you with grace and be a chain of honor around your neck. Wisdom shouts in the streets. She cries out in the public square. For simpletons turn away from me to death. Fools are destroyed by their own complacency, but all who listen to me will live in peace, untroubled by fear of harm. So the final thing I want to talk about this morning as we develop the craft of wisdom is that wisdom starts with listening to the right voice. Wisdom is available to everyone despite their background. Notice as you read the book of Proverbs how many times the command or the invitation to listen is repeated. It's throughout the book. I think it's maybe the most important verb in the book, listen. Why is that? Well, it definitely talks about listening to a righteous mother and father who would instruct you in God's ways. But I think it's also real because it says, like we just read in this passage, that wisdom cries out to everyone on the street. And the truth is that not all of us had a mom and dad who gave us practical skills or godly principles. Maybe nobody taught you how to change a tire or balance a checkbook or resolve a conflict or modeled what it looks like to live in a peaceful home. Does that mean that we are excluded from living a thriving, God-oriented life? Absolutely not. I think there's this deep hope built in this passage that wisdom is available for everyone who's willing to listen to the right voice. You are not excluded just because you felt like maybe you raised yourself. You may find yourself in adulthood and needing wisdom. I know I do. But the invitation is that we would seek it out. It takes effort to seek the best path. Wisdom's not found accidentally. You don't just keep doing the same things and expect a different result. You have to go and get the right input so you can learn how to make the right choices to live this God-oriented life and maybe do things different than what you experienced in your early years or childhood. Seeking wisdom is a practice. It's like playing the piano or practicing football or soccer. You have to over and over again make the choice to seek out good input when you come to something that you don't understand. It's humbling at first to say, I don't know how to do this, but we can develop the practice of finding wise voices to listen to and being able to admit that we don't always know what we're doing. I've got a situation like that right now. I thought I knew a lot about parenting. I've read a lot of books, I've done a lot of exercises, and they've all been helpful, but right now, raising teenagers is stretching me. And I've gone out and gotten someone who can give me good input on specific situations and stretch me to do different things so that I can be a wise parent. It won't help me if I keep doing my same defaults, which sometimes are to coddle and do too much for my kids. It won't help me if I just nag them or yell at them. No, I need to learn new skills to put in my tool bag, and I'm going out and asking questions and finding the right voice to help lead me through a different situation that I've never seen before. Some of you might be facing challenges in your finances and you know you really don't have this skill set. You might be facing challenges in parenting or in your marriage. You might be facing other kinds of challenges. What I want to ask you to consider is that wisdom comes from listening to the right voices and from being intentional. You need to think of someone that you admire in this area. You know they know more about finances. They know they're a little bit farther in the parenting road or in the marriage road than you are, and ask for input. Sometimes you might have to put your money where your mouth is. That's what I'm doing actually right now in the parenting area. I'm paying somebody who I know I can learn from. It also means just asking people who you're connected with in the church, another reason for community, that they would lead you in wisdom and you'd be intentional about it. There's an American proverb that really summarizes some of what we're learning in Proverbs chapter 1 today. It's attributed to a quote originally from Jim Rohn, who was an American entrepreneur. And he said this: "We must all suffer from one of two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. The difference is that discipline weighs ounces while regret weighs tons." When I read that out loud, I can feel it. I can feel what regret feels like in my stomach. And I can also feel what discipline feels like when I have to get myself to do something that's not the easy path. And you know what? Regret is far, far worse. And Proverbs 1 talks about, will you have the discipline to continue to practice wisdom, to continue to seek it out and be intentional about finding it? Or will you live with the pain of regret? That you didn't do it. You didn't go out and find better answers, but kept making the same mistakes over and over again. When we learn a posture of humility and we gain a willingness to enter each situation, first listening, seeking to understand before being understood, we build this habit and pattern of gaining wisdom. And over a lifetime, we begin to become wise people and we will reap the benefits of what we've sown. Even reading good books is part of this because it means I'm seeking out those right voices and learning. And it may not be a lot in any given season, but over a lifetime, we begin to reap the benefits of seeking out wisdom. So I want to challenge you as we wrap up today. What can you do this summer to actually seek to gain wisdom, to actually seek to live the good life, because you are finding God's principles and living them out in each situation? Not an easy life, but a good and satisfying life of obedience and blessing. Can I challenge you to consider reading one of the 31 Proverbs each day in the month of July? Of course, there's 30 days in July, so you'll go into August 1st. But also pick one out to really chew on for the day and see if you can live it out. I also want you to look for opportunities to learn. We're blessed to have many people from the wisdom generation in our church. If you need help with finances, if you need help with parenting, if you need help with growing in your relationship with God, there are people who would love to pour into your life. You can reach out to us at office@bg4.com if you're listening online. We're going to have a response available in person as well to say, I am looking for input. Maybe you are also realizing that you have something to give, and that passing on wisdom is something that should be part of your life. I know that our kids ministry, our student ministry, as well as our small group, our life group ministry, it's always looking for people that want to serve and want to pour out into others and into the next generation. So you might need to reach out to Elijah or to Connie, or you might need to reach out. Elijah's our youth pastor and Connie is our children's pastor, and let them know that you'd love to volunteer. Or another action step would be to reach out to Kim at bg4.com. Each of them have an email address that's at bg4.com, and let her know that you would love to host a group for learning, a life group, or you'd like to be part of leading one in the future. Those are ways that you can pour into the lives of others. I want to leave you with this as we pray. John opens the gospel, his story about Jesus, by saying, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. That Greek concept of word is very similar to the Hebrew concept of wisdom. Paul makes it explicit when he says that Christ is the wisdom of God. And so when we are seeking wisdom this summer, we're actually seeking Jesus. When we're seeking the best way to live and respond to each situation, what we're doing is following Jesus and wanting to make the way that he lives our default. And so would you join me in praying a dangerous prayer that God would teach us to walk in wisdom, to seek after wisdom each day, and that we would grow in becoming more like Jesus? Lord, I pray that you would allow us to seek after wisdom, that you would give us wisdom and help us to learn your mind and apply it, the way that you respond to people, the way that you love people, the way that you challenge people rather than coddling them, that you would teach us that kind of wisdom and we would live it out in really practical ways, that our families and our coworkers and our neighbors would feel the difference, that we are seeking wisdom, and in that we are seeking Jesus and wanting our lives to reflect the one we follow. God, we orient ourselves around you rather than asking you to just do what we want. And we love you in Jesus' name. Lord, through all these growing pains, I pray that we would come more like Jesus. I thank you so much for joining me today. And I pray that all of us would grow in wisdom together this summer.